Hi, friends. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I was going to say to the podcast, this is not a podcast, but I was recording a podcast earlier today. Welcome to the webinar. This is what we're calling College Admissions Unfiltered. And we asked ahead of time for you to bring your spiciest questions, the questions that you feel like don't get answered elsewhere. Some of you submitted questions. We're excited to get to them. But if you've got questions, you can throw them into the Q&A box and we will get to them. I'm joined today by some lovely guests. In fact, maybe we could just take a second to just introduce ourselves, and maybe we could do like a little half-minute intro, and then like, I don't know, one thing that you're thinking about as it relates to college admissions. I'll go first because I'm talking right now. I'm Ethan. I'm the college essay guy. I've spent 20 years basically thinking about this stuff, and this is, you know, the thing that I'm thinking about. Actually, I'll add one more thing. I spend a lot of time right now thinking about the future of college admission, in particular, the impacts of AI. And I had an interesting conversation earlier today with the dean of admission that I'll share about later. But right now, the main thing that I'm thinking about as it relates to admissions is what impact will AI have, both on the student experience and also on how colleges evaluate applications. Steph, I'm going to kick it to you.
Thanks, Ethan. Hi, guys. Stephanie Metrick. I've been in the beautiful world of admissions for over 17 years now, both as an admissions officer at Gettysburg College, University of Vermont, and also as a college admissions counselor at a highly selective all-girls boarding school outside of Baltimore. So been on both sides of the desk, as we like to call it, but really thrilled to be here with you all today and answering these fun questions. That's why I got into admissions in the first place, is to help answer questions like this and demystify, because I hated my own college search. So I want to make it better for everybody else. AI is also on my mind, Ethan. I think what I'm really interested in is how it's going to change what admissions officers may value in
Mm.
future applicants. So what will they be looking for? What are those things that you're not going to be able to do with AI that you still will need to demonstrate all on your own? So that's on my mind as we think about profile building and all these important things that students need to be doing.
Lovely. John, take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm John Tsai. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at CG. And before that, I worked in places from charter schools to independent schools as, college counseling. I've also, as a college counselor, director of college counseling, I've also been an admissions reader for UC Irvine. I'm out here in California. And I've been working with students privately for probably over 20 years now, from college counseling to essays. And what's on my mind is like very, very fresh, is I'm having this interesting debate with my wife. What is the value of Stanford? We're both Bay Area kids. And so I did some college counseling for my neighbor, and he just got into Stanford, but he also has a full scholarship to Washington University in St. Louis. So it's like, holy cow. And he's a full pay student. So I'm talking to the mom. Is Stanford worth $380,000, $400,000 relative to Wash U? And the bad news is dad went to Stanford. And so there's this bias towards Stanford. And like the mom's like, please don't go. Please, I'll put a down payment for a house right now. Right.
Right.
Wash U is great. So that's top of mind for me. How much is a specific college worth? And my wife was like, oh, if our son gets in, he's going to Stanford. I'm like, no. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Tom.
Wow, what's on my mind with college admissions is not nearly as like anecdotal and fun, but I'll give it anyway. So, hi to those of you who are joining a College Essay Guy webinar, maybe for the first time. We may have some first timers on here, who knows? So my name's Tom Campbell. I've been with College Essay Guy now for a little over 3 years. And prior to working at CEG, I spent a total of 6 years working in selective college admissions like Steph. I worked at Pomona College and College of the Holy Cross. So I went from working at a school with like a 30 to 40% admit rate to a less than 10% admit rate. So can definitely speak to what I guess admissions competition looks like the more and more selective you get, which many students and families, counselors who come to us for support are often interested in those types of schools because they tend to be ones that have college essays attached to them. I also used to work like Steph like John as a college counselor at an independent high school working with lots of students and families on all aspects of the college planning process, from college list building to standardized test strategy to what courses should you take, how should, what should be involved in extracurriculars, things like that. It's great to see. We launched a little poll. Thank you for those of the 60% of you or so who responded to it. But it's great to see that we have a lot of parents who are here today looking to support their kids. Looks like that's about 57% of you. And then we also have independent counselors, the next largest group, students. Few of you getting a head start. That's great. I'm imagining lots of parents are going to trickle down some info to their child of choice, I guess. Relevant child.
Not all of them, just the one they choose.
Just a few, just the child of choice. So yeah, everyone has one. I know I was for my mom. Kidding. Love the sisters. Anyway, my spicy, I guess, thought about college admission right now is I'm doing a little bit of work right now on updating some of our guides on our website about recommendation letters. We actually have a category about this in a second, but I just think back to like so many of the things that I thought really mattered in admissions but had no importance. So one of those for me, when I was asking for teachers for a letter or recommendation, I was like, I need to have like a math and science rec, and then a like more humanities, social science rec to show that I'm well-rounded. And then of course, working in admissions, I was like, I couldn't even tell you half the times what the subject was per se. I was interested in the best letters that said the best things. Generally from core teachers in core subjects, but it's just one of those things where there's so many, when you kind of unpeel the layers, things that like I was stressing out a ton about when I was going through the college process, were just thought in my mind, like logically, this must be what the person on the other end is looking for. And then to actually be doing that as a job, just made it really burst my bubble a lot in terms of what really matters and what makes a difference. So hopefully you leave this session today with a lot more clarity about what really does matter and makes a difference for your process.
Thanks. Well, the structure that we'll use is we're going to do half submitted questions and then half questions from you all who are participating live. So, Steph, I'm going to kick it over to you first to grab one of the spicy questions that came in, and you pick one and then go for it. And then we'll go Tom and then John, and then I'll pick one. And then we'll do a second round, Steph, Tom, John, Ethan, and then we'll open it up to questions from y'all. So, Steph, choose your question and let's see what you got.
Okay, so I already saw something similar to this come up in the chat, so I'm going to go with this one because it's like, top of mind for everyone. Although admissions offices say they have a holistic review process, how often are applicants eliminated right off the bat due to test scores and GPA? Okay, so my short answer is often enough to do the work, if I'm being honest, right? Like often enough that you need to do the work. Academic performance and rigor are always the foundation for every admissions process. And I think like one of the things you'll hear us all say a lot tonight are the words, it depends. This is the one time I don't have to say that. It does not depend in this situation. All colleges care about test scores, not so much, but GPA and your academic performance most of all. And so, when admissions offices sit down, the first thing that they do when they're evaluating an application is ask themselves, can this student do the work? Once that's established, then they can get into the deeper holistic stuff, right? The deeper conversations around what will you contribute, considering institutional priorities, all the other things that come into play. So yeah, you can be eliminated if you are objectively outside the academic quality of the applicant pool that year. And I think that range can shift. A school might get a huge bump in applications. Like I think about Villanova. They went and they won 2 national basketball championships back to back, and their stats skyrocketed in those couple years. So it's not just about being good enough, it's about being competitive in that year's pool. So once you can kind of establish, yes, I am academically qualified to go to this school, not only based on my own performance, but within the context of that applicant pool, then they're going to be able to dive into the holistic review and really look at all the other amazing things that you bring to the table.
Lovely. Thanks. Let's just kick it over to you, Tom.
Sure. So we got a lot of pre-submitted questions before this session. Thank you to those of you who sent them in. And a lot of them had to do, I'd say, Steph's question first and foremost, the category of just academics more broadly. Definitely lots of questions about that, understandably, because that is the most important aspect of the college admission process, no matter what institution we're talking about. But but understandably, kind of tangential, I guess, question in addition to your own courses and grades, which are the most important by far piece of your candidacy, would be standardized testing. And I think right now, I just put a few of the questions that I'm going to touch on in my answer in the Zoom chat. But right now, understandably, there's a lot of maybe confusion, skepticism, worries about standardized testing in this current landscape, because there are a lot of high profile colleges and universities that have announced returns to testing and have cited various studies based on their own institutions or rationales as to why they made that decision. Something that I really want to normalize on this call today is that the vast majority of college and universities still remain test optional right now. And so it's really easy to start to spiral and think that something is kind of like, you know, in en masse happening when there's a few high profile names, things that are picked up in media that get circulated that start to, I'd say, instill maybe more panic than is necessary. But the reality is that a test optional admission landscape is one where students who are confident in their scores, they feel like they would be additive components to their candidacy at a certain school, can choose to submit those scores. I have previously worked at 2 test optional institutions, Holy Cross, which has been test optional for quite a long time, a few decades at this point, and then Pomona, which transitioned to being test optional halfway through my time working there. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, as with many schools, Pomona transitioned to a test optional policy that they still retain to this day. There are a few, you know, more selective colleges like Pomona that have returned to testing, but most remain test optional to this day. And I like to give this anecdote because I think it's really helpful for families and students and counselors on the other end to see like test optional admissions in practice. But we did a simulation when I was at Pomona. It was actually part of our like reader training, where all of us as admission officers who got the same training, we were looking for the same academically qualified types of students based on primarily their courses, what was available to them, all the things that Steph mentioned, how they performed in those. And then, you know, prior to the test optional landscape, we also looked at their test scores, of course, as a component additionally of their academic preparedness. But what we found when we did like kind of a reader training study was that half of us as staff were given the same admission files with testing, half were given files without testing, and we gave the same ratings and admission recommendations across the board as a staff. So, I mean, pat on the back for us as a staff for kind of having clearly norms as a staff in terms of what we were looking for academically. But it was, I just like to share that with students and families to help kind of underscore that it really is your grades and courses that are the first and foremost piece of this process. Sometimes people are like, oh, can a test score make up for lower performance in grades? Sometimes, but by and large, it's your school-based performance that makes, you know, moves the needle, makes a difference. So to the question of, can we like trust test optional, you know, policies? How is it possible that a college would look at 2 candidates on a screen or, you know, in their committee room and take the one that doesn't have testing? It is very highly likely that a student could have a really, really high test score that's actually kind of common in a lot of these admission pools, but not meet other important priorities for the college. So of course, in that situation, if there's 2 candidates, one with a really high test score, one with no test score at all, but the kid with no test scores is meeting important priorities for the college, like they come from a state that the college really wants more representation from, or the college applicant pool skews more female and it's a male student, right? There are a lot of other things kind of happening behind the scenes in terms of how colleges make admissions decisions. And so I think it's really easy to blow up the standardized test score as this like huge component of a process, when in reality, it can be an additive component for students who have scores within the middle 50% of that college or above the middle 50% of that college's reported scores. But it's not something that I'd say is the end all be all in this process, especially in this current landscape. So that's my take on testing.
Tom, can I ask a follow-up on that about standardized
Yeah.
testing? Let's say you're in 9th grade, right? You're a 9th grade student or 8th grade student, right? 8th or 9th grade. They're a strong academic student. They're probably applying to some highly selectives. My advice to that student about how much time they should spend doing test prep has drastically changed in the last year, I would say. Whereas before, I'm like, well, it just depends. Are you a good test taker? Or are schools that you're applying to? But I'm assuming at the highly selective level, more schools in the next 4 years could shift towards requiring testing again, or being, what's it called, test flexible, like give us some numbers, right? I wonder what your opinion is on that.
I mean, I think that this current landscape of college admission allows students maybe more opportunity to earlier on in high school start to think more about areas that I actually would argue would make them more of a distinctive candidate, um, irrespective of test scores, right? High test scores are not that uncommon. Like, so I guess if you're a ninth grade, 10th grader who is academically gifted, who is potentially already thinking maybe about, college admissions, or maybe their family is thinking about a certain type of range of colleges that they see their child enrolling at, I think the time is better spent in this current landscape and environment for most students in thinking about ways to explore, for example, areas where they can make initiative and impact with their extracurricular activities, and kind of build upon maybe exploring their academic interests in high school outside of just the standard classes in their school. I think, for example, rather than like spending all of 9th and 10th grade cramming to really, really get a perfect score on the SAT or ACT, you probably have more likelihood of standing out, even at schools that do require testing, if you are prioritizing some of these other qualitative factors that really, when you start to target those selective schools too, I think end up making more of that difference than solely focusing only on numbers.
This is not a hot take, but here's a way that I would like to suggest that ninth graders spend their time is broadening your college list so that you find 8 schools that you really love and can get into. Now, for some folks, you're gonna be like, yeah, yes, but Stanford. And I'm like, it so often happens that students will put like their success or fail based on like, do they get into this one selective school or not, or this like small set. And some of you have heard me say this before, so forgive me, but like, if you were to spend just a little bit of time early on, and parents, you can be great allies in this, being like, hey, ChatGPT, what are schools like Stanford? Because these are the 5 or 8 things that I'm looking for. What are some colleges that have those things that are less selective? And start to, as a family, start to fall in love with these other options. Because as John noted in his intro, some of those other schools, if you can, sometimes the difference between like falling in love with a school and not loving a school is just like doing some research. So I just want to encourage some of that slice of, let's say, 10 hours that a student would spend doing test prep in the early grades. And by the way, we're not here saying that students should do 9th and 10th grade SAT prep necessarily, but if somebody's like starting to think about it that early, spend some time doing some shopping early on to find those schools that you can really get excited about. John, we got a bunch of questions about extracurricular activities. Will you grab one of those and share your take?
Yeah, the 3 that are in front of me are pretty different. I'm trying to find the one that either resonates with the most people or I resonate with, and that actually is tough. I'm gonna pick the first one. So, like sports achievements, like how important is sports if you're not going to get recruited? And the question that kind of broke my heart was, should they just drop the sport and focus on doing research or something related to their major instead? And I think my frustration when I read a question like that is the word drop, right? Because if you don't like the sport, drop it, right? Because then it sucks. Like, don't do things that you don't like. But if you really love the sport, especially let's say it's like a team sport, there's community. Like, I'm a pickleball nerd, so for me as an adult, like I have my pickleball community. Just to like drop it because it doesn't, help me get a job. That seems kind of crazy. But let's say like you want to do research on something and you have to decide between the two because like young people are really busy, right? Like time is the only thing that all humans have that's actually equal, 24 hours in a day. So there are some difficult moments, but I want to share a couple anecdotes. Generally, if you're not going to get recruited, probably doesn't matter that much. But if you're going to get recruited, that's like one of the easiest ways to get into college. But I had a student who he loved tennis, really, really, did well in tennis, but like he wasn't going to get recruited for tennis. But he also played squash on the side. He also played like a whole bunch of other racket sports. And when he ended up applying to Vassar, he did not put very much on his application outside of like the academic stuff, except for like this one line about tennis and then being a part of the squash team. And then the squash coach called him, like literally called him, right? And squash is not a sport that you're not going to get money from. He ended up going to that school and played on the squash team for 4 years. He got to a lot of great schools, but here was a moment where like he wasn't trying to get recruited. Squash wasn't his main sport, but that did make a huge difference. And I was talking to Scott, he's one of our college counselors. He said that when he read for Middlebury back in the days, like there would be moments where like they would be looking for students that were athletic enough, capable enough in a certain sport that maybe could translate. I don't know if you drop the sport. It depends how much it means to you, but you're not going to be that unique doing research. But I also don't want to say don't do research. Like if you love research, go do research. It's you only have 24 hours in a day. We don't get to always have control. Do what you think you're most caring about, and that will probably help you stand out more because maybe the person you do research with, they're going to see your passion and they're going to write a great letter of rec. Or they're going to see that you're just doing it because mom and dad's telling you to do it and like your friends are doing it. Then it's just another line. And for sports, it also depends on the type of sports. I think individual sports are a little bit different than team sports. It depends on if you're applying to like a D1 versus a D3 versus a club, right? But I think physical exercise is important. So please keep that in mind that if you're not in good physical and mental shape, it's going to be hard for you to be a strong, student over 4 years.
Thanks for that. My turn. I want to tackle, here's one. I'm going to put it in the chat. The question is, would mentioning a trauma that caused you mental discomfort, like depression, in your personal statement cause bias? In other words, mentioning that you're fighting with a mental illness, would that ruin your image in the eyes of college admission officer, even if you frame your essay on how you overcame that trauma? Okay. I was interviewing a dean of admission 3 hours ago, and we talked about this very thing. So hot off the press. And I think this is representative of what most admission officers would say. There is it's not like a bonus points or negative points by mentioning a trauma. And we were talking specifically about mental health challenges. So let's say you're talking about a mental health challenge of like anxiety. You don't, first of all, I think there's some bias that students think they have to mention these things or they should because it's like better or they're going to get like bonus points at the college. Y'all, you do not, it's not better to write about a challenge necessarily. Okay. There's a whole guide. Google why you don't have to write about trauma in your college essay. And we've got a whole bunch of other options for you to consider. Okay. So you don't have to. If you do decide to write about it, I think it's really important to, as you're saying to your questioner, to frame the essay on how you overcame that trauma. So it's like challenges, what I did about it, what I learned from the experience. I think that's really important. Having said that, there's another blog post that we wrote on mental health challenges, and we've got a 3-part podcast on this, where what students don't often know is that if you did experience something like this, putting it in your additional information section, which is a short 300-ish word section, you can put whatever that experience was, what you did about it, what you learned, and then you can write whatever else you want about for your personal statement. 2 considerations. 1, if you are going to write about mental health challenges, there was a student that I worked with this past year through our Matchlighters program. That's our program for low-income students. By the way, applications just opened. If you're looking for one-on-one support, yeah, we would love to hear from you. You can apply. I'll put the link in the chat. But I was working with a student through our Matchlighters program, and this student was writing about mental health challenges. And in the application, because this is not something the student had processed very much, there were like 5 or 6 mentions of it. And my question to the student is like, how many mentions do you think you want the reader to have? Because if the reader is reading this, and this was a pretty severe, form of depression that for this student, if the reader's reading it like 6 or 7 times, sure, there's no like bias. Like they're not going to be like, well, you're automatically rejected. But what the reader might start to wonder is like, oh, is this student are they going to be able to thrive on our campus? This is what this dean of admission was sharing with me today. That's the question in their minds. So the question you got to ask yourself on a practical level is, how many mentions of this do I actually need in here? Do I need 7 mentions of the mental health challenge, or is 1 or 2 enough? That's the first thing. But the bigger question that I want you to ask yourself, if you're considering writing about this, consider that the purpose of your college application is to demonstrate the skills, qualities, values, and interests that you're going to bring to a college campus. Ask yourself, you have this canvas of 650 words to write your personal statement. Is that the best way to show your skills, qualities, values, and interests through this particular challenge? It might be. You might be like, yeah, that's my whole deal. But it could be that, again, you can put that in your additional information section, have it speak there, and then find another topic that allows you to talk about all the other awesome things that aren't necessarily related to this one challenge, maybe that you've been dealing with for the last year or 2 years. And it could be that there's something else that helps you stand out, that shows, that's what I call more elastic, that connects to lots of different sides of you. Also, final thing I'll say, when I ask this dean of admission, what are some of the common topics you've been seeing? Anxiety, mental health challenges are a very common topic. So it becomes harder to stand out if we're just looking at it through that lens of like standing out. So quick takeaways, you can put that in your additional information section if you want to, write about something else in your personal statement. Having said that, if you're like, no, this is my thing, this is my story, I want to write about this, you can. Just talk about what you did, what you learned. All right, kicking it over back to, actually, Steph, back to you. Let's talk about demonstrated interest. By the way, let me set this up. What is demonstrated interest? Because some folks won't know. Demonstrated interest, are you going to do that? I just wanted to show people how important demonstrated interest is. Okay, so this is the State of College Admissions Report from the National Association of College Admission Counselors. Here are the things, this is 2023, the colleges consider most important: GPA, and then strength of your high school curriculum. So they're looking at your achievement. Did you get good grades? And rigor. Were you taking hard classes or not? The next thing they look at is something called positive character attributes, which is something that that's on a podcast that I'll link in the chat. Then there's essay or writing sample. And then we've got this thing called students' interest in attending. This is demonstrated interest. Steph, tell us what it is, and answer, I don't know, whichever question on DI you want to.
Absolutely. So essentially, demonstrated interest is a college assessing how big of a yield risk you might be. So whether or not, if they admit you, are you likely to attend their institution? And they track this in a number of ways. And we'll get into that through the question that I'm going to answer. But essentially, okay, the question here, will some colleges waitlist a highly qualified student because they think they won't attend? So with yield considerations in mind, is this one way that colleges use to waitlist or use the waitlist and attempt to control yield? For example, a student who gets into the top 5 engineering programs, but then is waitlisted at the 10th ranked engineering program. So again, the short answer is yeah, they will definitely waitlist you sometimes if they think you're not interested in coming. So at some schools, demonstrated interest can definitely be a factor. So if a student looks overqualified and hasn't opened any emails, visited campus, attended a virtual session, or bothered with the supplemental essays, this was a big one for me, guys. Don't put all your eggs in that personal statement basket. If you write this like, chef's kiss, gorgeous personal statement, and you've got wet, hot garbage supplemental essays, you have just told me I can do the work I chose not to for your school. And now you've hurt my feelings, and I have an ego when I'm putting you on my wait list. So make sure you put the effort in all the way across the board with that quality. But so the school's just going to assume you're not serious or it's a throwaway app. And if the college thinks they're a backup for you, they're just not going to waste and admit on somebody that's likely to say, no, I'm going somewhere else. So if you think about it, colleges, they're constantly trying to manage their yield. Their dream scenario is to admit the exact number of students who enroll. And the more selective that they get to appear, the better their rankings, the more desirable they become. And, I think with the uncertainty rising among all of you, which is completely fair because it's so hard to predict things anymore, applications are going out more and more. We're seeing that application number rise again. And as that application number rises, students and families applying to more places, colleges are going to be digging in to be looking who's for real, whose applications are serious, who is really interested in coming to our school. And so all of that will come into play in the process. And so I'm going to cheat, Ethan, and I'm sorry, but there's the 2 questions. There's another one that kind of went like right hand in hand with this, which is like immediately when parents hear that, they're like, oh, how can I help my baby? And I get you. Like, I'm right here with you. I totally get it. Especially if you've got a shy, introverted kid and you're like, oh, they don't know how to make relationships with admissions officers, or like they don't want to get out and talk to people. Can I sit behind the computer? Can I demonstrate interest for them? So you can help behind the scenes in some ways, like open emails, do that, right? Watch videos, click on things together though. Do this with your child, not just for your child. Watch virtual tours together, click the links. But I will say, like, that's lower impact stuff. The most meaningful interest that you can demonstrate will always come from the student. So use this as a chance to help your child build comfort reaching out, asking questions, making connections. That confidence is going to pay off big in college. I mean, think about the importance of faculty mentorship or the people that they might meet. Getting to gain experience in reaching out and overcoming some of that can really help them make the connections that will help them survive their university experience. Um, and also, real interest, by the way, equals real questions. Just like want to throw that out there. Don't just like email admissions people nonsense. Like, help your child prep thoughtful questions that show that they're actually considering how that college is going to help them further define and reach their goals. They're not just trying to rack up brownie points. Tom, do you want to plug? We've got another webinar next week, I think, right? Do you want to plug that?
Yeah, so next week we're doing a webinar. So actually, Ethan, I don't know if you have a second to just drop the webinars and live events webpage in the Zoom chat. Not everyone knows this because a lot of times people hear about our webinars from our email list, but this page is amazing. It has like all of our upcoming webinars on there's a calendar view. You can see everything that we have coming up for the usually next month or two. And you can also add a calendar attachment. So if you scroll down a little bit and you want to subscribe to our events calendar, you can download and add it to your Google Calendar, your Apple Calendar, and it's really, really easy to then have all of our sessions kind of populated on your calendar, and you sign up for the ones that you want and don't want. So yeah, next week on April 16th, we have a demonstrated interest session with myself, Morgan Phillips, our Director of College Counseling, and Jay, who's one of our new college counselors. So we're all going to talk about college visits, tips, especially if you're thinking about maybe spring break or summer plans. We're going to really dive into this topic in a lot of depth.
Lovely. Thanks. I'm playing mod today. It's kind of fun. Let's go. Tom, will you just keep it for letters of rec?
Sure. Yeah. So I know that was my kind of initial, I guess, hot take in admissions when I first came on. But let me go ahead and, on the spirit of kind of what Steph was saying about a shy student, I'm going to also put in a question about a shy student and a concerned parent. So the parent says, I have an extremely bright son, mostly A's, around a 1450 SAT. However, he has ADHD and he turns in his homework late. He's sometimes tardy. He doesn't engage in discussions because he's very shy, and he probably appears disinterested in board and class. I'm guessing that most teachers don't care for him much. Should he not waive his rights to see his letters of recommendation made by his school coach and school counselor? Or is it still better to waive that right, even if it gives them the freedom to mention some of his, in this parent's words, less desirable traits? There's a lot to unpack with this question. And something that I really want to underscore is that teachers and counselors who work in schools are not in the business of trying to derail your child's life. They would generally not say yes to writing a letter if they don't have positive things to share about your student. So if a teacher and or counselor agree to send in a letter on your child's behalf, you should trust that the things that they're going to highlight in that letter are going to be positive, additive qualities of the student. It's only really a one-page letter. So for the vast majority of high school students, you can find a page worth of positive attributes to share with a college admission team, as opposed to spending the bulk of the letter, for instance, highlighting what you might be describing as maybe more of the less desirable traits or the areas that need improvement. It is not uncommon for counselors or teachers to mention areas where a student has really grown. You see that every now and then, but in general, these are letters of advocacy. And that's kind of like a reframe in terms of maybe how you can think of them, is that the people who are advocating for you in your school generally want to see you succeed. And they're going to highlight the areas where you shine most. So the things that you mentioned kind of previously or in the early part of your comment are probably going to be the bulk of what you share. To the question of should you waive your rights, just to loop in those who are kind of maybe confused of what that means, most the standard practice in the letter of recommendation process. So many colleges will ask you to submit a counselor letter of recommendation that will be written by your school-based counselor, and it tends to be kind of like um, they're like a secondary source, or kind of like the house lights, if you want to use like a theater analogy, where they're kind of sharing a broader picture of who the student is, how have they achieved compared to the courses and elements that are present in their school environment. What's their thing? What are their future plans? It kind of gives this big picture idea of who the student is, how they might show up on that college campus. The teacher letter is a little more of like a zoom in, a primary source, or like the spotlight on the student's presence in a classroom environment, in an academic setting, who they are as an intellectual. And are they the type of student who's like really stirring the pot and like really kind of putting out like really spicy discussion topics in class? Or are they the one that has like a lot of quiet insights, that they're not always the one shooting their hand up to answer everything, but when they speak, they have a real sense of depth to what they have to share? I've seen letters really that run the gamut here, but in general, the vast majority are positive. And colleges usually expect that families and students are going to do what's called waiving their FERPA rights, which is basically saying that you're not going to you're not going to be able to see your letters of recommendation from your counselor and or your teachers for them to be submitted to colleges. And colleges like that because it shows them that it is not like tainted, or kind of like there's no influence, or there's not influence on the family or the student's end in terms of what the letter's actually saying. But in general, I just want to kind of like appease fears that like there's widespread like ripping apart of students happening because of these FERPA waivers. That's really not the reality. Again, counselors and teachers want to advocate for you. I strongly recommend going forward and waiving your rights, because there's very few instances, I'd say, where that would be an issue. And it is also sometimes a policy of an individual high school that they require you to waive your rights in order to receive those letters. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Tom, can I jump in with a spicy take?
Sure. Second time around, John, why don't you just keep stirring the pot with all my answers? Go ahead.
So the background is I'm also a former high school teacher. So I've written a lot of letters direct for students. Because I was a former college counselor, I had to write the counselor letter directs, and they're different. And I had students that I taught that I did not enjoy teaching, that I did struggle to write positive things. But just like Tom said, which I would say is probably true for over like 95, maybe even higher, 98% of the time, teacher is not going to tank a student's chances. This is their future. So even the students that I really couldn't stand, right? I would dig deep to be like, what is the best thing that I can say? Because like you're advocating for somebody. But I'll also say this, like as a teacher, especially I was at a charter school. I mean, I was really overworked. Like their kids have come to you, like you could set these policies, like you could only ask for a letter of rec if it's like whatever, 2 months away, 30 days away, whatever. You could, but there's always a kid that comes the day before, like, hey, Mr. Ty, I am applying here. I'm so sorry I didn't ask you. Can you write a letter? Like, I'm gonna use a template. Hard stop. I'm using a template, right? And when I was the director of college counseling at a private school, I actually didn't allow any of my teacher recs to go directly to the schools. I stopped it using it was Naviance, right? So Naviance can be like, you could pause it. And there was a really great teacher that made a really bad mistake. She uploaded the wrong letter. So the letter was like talking about a different student doing Girl Scouts. And I was just like, wait, I know this student. There's no mention of Girl Scouts. What's going on? And I'm reading and it's like a glowing letter. And I was like, oh my gosh. So it's like, I guess I just want to point out there are weird cases in which, yeah, I'm wondering, Tom, from your perspective, did you ever read a letter where it bragged about somebody doing something and it didn't show up on their activities list?
Every now and again. I mean, I worked in admissions for 6 years, and I would say these are kind of really very statistically minute situations. So I kind of, I guess, like lean on the math in this case of like over the thousands of applicants over multiple years, someone who's working in admissions, like the chances of this happening are pretty slim. And also, I'd say mistakes in letters of recommendation are not really, the student isn't really impacted by that as much. Because it's not really the student's own essays and their own work that I'd say is given maybe more scrutiny or judgment, for lack of a better word, by the admission officer. But for a counselor, for example, to write a school, college name in a letter that maybe isn't the one that you work at, or things like that. That will happen every now and then, even though the vast majority, 99% of letters are not specific to a certain college, but something like that would not, cause a college admission officer to like throw a student's application out of the running, because again, it's the student's own work that's, I'd say, the most significant in that process. And they know that counselors and teachers are busy, overworked, especially depending on where the counselor teacher is coming from. So I'd say college admissions officers really understand that like those things happen, and don't penalize students for it.
One last thing, please ask early, right? For letters of rec, ask early, give your teachers and counselors time, then those errors won't happen. Yeah.
The guide for that, I'll link it in the chat in just a second. We've spent about 20 minutes answering questions that were given. We're going to spend more time answering more questions, but we're going to shift the format slightly. I want Tom, Steph, and John, if you'll just let's just tackle the question. Actually, John, you're going to answer the next question verbally. Whoever's not speaking, I want you to just go into the Q&A and just start answering questions. And the way that we'll do it is if you could just copy the question, paste it into the chat with your response. I think that would be a lovely way to do it. And then we'll just share all the chat with everybody. We'll load that onto a Google Doc and share afterwards. But John, I'd love for you to, and that, by the way that we'll do that is we're going to get through all these questions. You've got like 30. We're going to get through all of them in the next 20 minutes. I predict. That's a lofty claim, but let's see. John, talk about affordability a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to skip the 2 questions that came in because I think a better one came in the chat, right? So I'm going to put that in there. And so I want to address affordability, financial aid. And here's like the question, probably Californian, right? Because it's a UC. How do you figure out whether it's, how do you discern whether a 4-year private school, and this is also assuming this family doesn't qualify for financial aid, right? That 360K number is like that number I kind of just threw out for Stanford, 350 to 400, because like tuition at certain schools are like 90K a year now, versus your great in-state, right? So it doesn't have to be a UC, but your great in-state option. That is really hard. I don't know the answer to that. And this is something I talk about regularly with my friends and I consider with my family. I think the real answer goes out to, it depends on your child. Because yes, you could look at, there's like a monetary difference. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the call, well, especially like for my neighbor who actually can get free private school, right? That's a huge amount of money. But when you go to your local public school, and I'm a little bit biased, I'm bringing in my own experience. I graduated from UC Berkeley. My wife went to UCLA. There's so many stories of people going to these large public schools, especially the UCs, where in many of the majors, they can go through 4 years and not a single professor learn their name. That's obviously not true for small classes like foreign language and other things. But like if you're like a science major, right? Like you're going to be sitting in these like giant pre-med classes, like, and the grad students will know your name. So if my son is somebody that can thrive while being anonymous in a large lecture hall, then I think the UCs and public school system can be a great, like, I don't know, a great return on investment. But if my son is somebody that like needs regular interaction, being able to ask those direct questions in the middle of a lecture, not all private schools offer that, but many more, especially smaller private schools like the liberal arts schools will offer that. And then one of the questions that was sent was, parents are planning to retire, their student has liberal arts colleges on the list, and they're pretty much saying that you're going to have to give us your entire life savings if you get in, right? Like, what do you do? And I think part of it is make sure you have the right college list. There are great schools that can give generous merit aid. And this is not secret information, right? Does it change year to year? Yes. And I think with college finances changing this year, I think that might change. But there are schools that are always known to be generous with merit aid. If you go to especially independent high school, I bet your college counselor knows. I bet if you go to a public high school, somebody in the school knows, because you probably don't have a college counselor, you have like a counseling team, right, or a guidance counselor, and really use that information to help you have a robust college list that isn't just about selectivity, but also deals with affordability.
Thanks. I'll grab one that came in before. What do colleges really think of pay-to-play summer programs? This is, and there's more to it, but I'll give a short answer to this. Colleges are looking for, well, we have a blog post on this. I'll just show you some of the things that colleges are looking for. I'll put this in the chat, in fact. The college, we call these the college admission nutrients. This is based on an analysis of more than 300 college websites for what they're looking for. And the things that they're looking for, I'm going to get to the answer to the question. They're looking for things like intellectual curiosity and service to others and leadership or initiative and collaboration and consistent engagement. So I'm going to answer this in a way that's going to help you answer other questions. But if colleges are looking for those qualities, I'm going to put them in the chat again. These are what we call the nutrients. Ask yourself, to what extent would this thing, whether it's a pay-to-play summer program or really anything else, to what extent would that help me show these qualities? So, for instance, I want to go to this awesome writing program at Northwestern. That's where I went to school. Is it going to help show my intellectual curiosity? Well, kind of depends on the program. If there is a particular program that would definitely show my intellectual curiosity, then it's like, cool, check mark, bonus points. You get some intellectual curiosity showing. Service to others, probably not so much for a pay-to-play program. Leadership or initiative, probably not. I mean, you showed the initiative to apply, maybe, but it could be that a program or let's say a project that's more self-directed, something that you dreamed up and created, could show a little more initiative potentially, but it's not bad. It's just like, do you get bonus 3 points? I'm speaking sort of generally, or bonus like 7 points in terms of leadership or initiative. Collaboration. Would there be collaboration opportunities at the summer program? Sure, probably. Consistent engagement, that's another thing colleges look for. Maybe not so much for that, but that's okay because you can show consistent engagement in a few other areas. So I guess my point here is that you can use these sort of as a lens for thinking about any kinds of opportunities. Something that students also ask is like, does it look bad if I go to a Yale program if I'm applying to Hopkins? No, colleges don't care if if you apply to another program. They're like, cool, it looks like the student's extending their interests and they're doing stuff about it. They're spending their summer engaged in the things that they want to be engaged with. Tom, Steph, anybody add anything to this on pay-to-play program? Sorry, you're probably answering questions. It's okay if not. It's totally fine if not.
I trust you,
do.
Ethan. I'm sure you did it. I'm answering questions in the chat.
You answer questions,
think-
Steph.
I
Tom's
think
got a
the
thing. Go.
I think the one thing that I would add, just in addition to what you shared, is that as someone, for example, asked a question in the chat that was like, what percentage of admitted to top 20 universities have published one or more research projects to high school journals like JEI, JSR, or Concord? So speaking as a former admission officer, I think it's really interesting because someone asked a question earlier too of like, do admissions officers even know like what these programs entail, or kind of the level of competition for some of these research programs or journals that sometimes students work is featured in? And the answer is no. Like, most of these admissions officers are not going through intense training on all of these different paid opportunities that exist out there in the landscape. And I don't say that to say like they're not valuable at all. For many students, this is an avenue or a vehicle for them to explore a topic that is really interesting to them. I think the over fixation on things like being published or like being featured in a certain journal, to me, is a little overblown, because in general, a person in college admissions is going to be captivated by the discoveries that you came to from this project. They want to hear about what you learned in doing it, both what you learned about yourself in terms of being an academic and working towards a long-term goal, working on a project over multiple months. They're not quite as much scanning for like, did it appear in the journal? They want to know more about, I'd say, of course, if you have that accolade to share, that's a great, I'd say, cherry on top, but it's not the lens that the person reading the application is moving through or kind of using as like a sense of how good a program is. They're not looking at just how selective it was to be admitted to Yale Young Global Scholars or, to do these types of things. It's a matter of what you do with these opportunities and how you communicate those that has more importance, I would say. We even had a family recently that came to us and was like, oh, our son wants to work on, I think it was a family, Steph, I think you actually shared this with us. And it was like, he's really interested in engineering and wants to create his own plane, like, or some type of like remote control plane, but he's worried that he's not going to have it done in time by when he needs to submit his app. And I was like, that's totally okay. You share about the progress and the journey of making whatever you have to make by the time your application is sent in. And if it's not fully realized, the admission officer is not expecting you to mail them the plane. They don't need to see, the physical proof that it is working. They're going to appreciate the initiative that you took to go at the extra mile and explore something independently.
Someone's asking, I felt my son did a really good job picking out colleges, filled out his application on his own, including writing his own essays without third-party paid assistance with very little return. What gives? First of all, I want to say like I feel that pain. Yeah, I feel like a lot of like care hearing that. And the thing I want to say is like I hear your frustration and it sometimes just goes that way. And that's not going to be like much solace, is that it's the process can be so random, seemingly random at times. You can seem like you're going to do all the things, and then things just don't fall in your favor. If he's and this is another, there's another question that came in is like, what happens if the decisions just didn't come in your favor? What do you do? Do you take a gap year? Or do you prepare for transferring? I mean, there's a lot we could get into in that. I would say, in short, if people are worried that a gap year is going to hurt them, it doesn't. Especially, I would say over the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, more students are taking more gap years, students who are accepted and students who aren't accepted. And in a year, they've got, more experience under their belt. They've pursued their interests further, have a clearer sense of what they're looking for, and create great applications, both with support or without support. And it turns out well. So I've heard tons of situations where that happens. It's not the end of the world. I know that there's sort of like a momentum thing after high school. They want to kind of keep the party going, or not so much, but like, keep the train running. But a gap year is not fatal. It's totally, it can be a really wonderful time. And I've seen students learn a whole lot about themselves. So just like strong recommend for potential gap year. John, I'm going to kick it to you for one, and I'm going to go back in and do some typing in the chat. What do you pick one and
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm gonna hit answer live. It says, how does a college score GPA, especially for schools that score or rank based on a 100-point scale? So there's a lot of schools with a lot of grading systems out there. So a lot of people are like, oh, 4.0, like A, B, like there are so many other ones. And a 100-point scale is actually one of the easiest ones to understand. There are schools with like a 7-point scale with a whole bunch of other weird scales. So number one, you are read based on the context of your school. Your school will be submitting to the admissions team a school profile. And in that school profile, assuming that they have one, right, which they probably do, they'll explain how these grades kind of are represented in your school. So I would say this is not even a concern at all, even though it's a concern I hear every year. It's like, oh, my school's so special. And then I kind of remind them there's probably 30,000 high schools in America, and each one thinks that they're really special. And each one tries really hard to make their curriculum the best, whether it's through AP, IB. I read it other ones like, what if we have a really cool curriculum, but it doesn't have AP or IB? That does not hurt you at all. That could even make you stand out. The reason I can say that, at my old school, I was a part of the team that got rid of that AP system to our own advanced curriculum. And while doing that research, part of my job as a director of college counseling was to call up different types of institutions. So I called up some public schools because I was in California, the UCs were important. I called up some very highly selectives, and I also called up some liberal arts schools. And I said, this is our proposal. We're kind of leaving the AP system and going towards this new type of curriculum. Our curriculum happened to look very similar to some of the course names that you might take in college. And so every single school said, oh, that actually helps us understand the level of rigor, right, that your students are going to be going through. And then we looked at the data for the next 3 years afterwards. I would say we definitely got a lot better college admissions results because of that. So in an industry in which standing out helps you, doing what everybody else does and looking like everybody else makes it harder, whether it's your activities or even honestly the classes offered at your school. So I wouldn't be worried if your school does something different.
Thanks.
I
Go.
actually wanted to ask this group that very first question.
Yeah. Were you re-asked it?
Is there a current surge, I guess, in the freshman class that is making this year, the admissions for 2025, particularly difficult for acceptance? This is interesting to me because, in my friend group, many of my friends or my wife's friends have kids applying or in high school. So this morning, somebody forwarded me this article that says like, oh, record number, it's so hard to get into college. And then I'm just like, oh, I feel like I've read that same article for about like 15 years in a row, right? And the thing is, it is true every year,
Well,
but it's
but
not unique to this year in my mind. But we are finally at the what they call the enrollment cliff. But the thing is, enrollment cliff meaning like, let's say there's fewer U.S. high school students, but there's probably going to be a lot of applicants internationally. So the total number of applicants probably will not be decreasing at most schools next year. I did not see internally from our students and our data that this was a more difficult year. I'm wondering how the rest of you have kind of proceeded this season.
yeah, there's a slight increase. Like, the Common App, I just looked this up. The Common App was like 4% up, in applicants and applications. And I think part of that is test optional. Like, there have been so many, like, more students are applying to more schools because it's test optional. There was also when the Common App came out years ago, suddenly more students could apply to more schools. But I think the challenge here, or the perception, is that it's more difficult to get into college, when that's really true for just like a small sliver of these highly selective schools that get lots of press. The Ivy League, for example, those schools, yeah, it's more selective each year to get into those schools. But the fact is, the average college in the United States, the average acceptance rate is like 65, 67%, I think. So there are so many good, yeah, this is me getting back on my soapbox. There's so many awesome colleges out there. Most colleges accept most students, even though it may not seem like that because of what's happening in the press. Tom, do you have any different thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wanted to just someone addressed in the Q&A, and I know we're running short on time, so I feel like this is like kind of related to this question in some
Oh,
way.
go.
But in the chat, something that I think, um, in terms of like, what are things that people think colleges care a lot about that actually don't make a difference? I mean, this is like an unrelated topic, but things like service hours, like there's just so many things I feel like that students and families assume are behind the decisions that, maybe, for example, you're coming from, I don't know, the person who put in the question that John's referring to, maybe they have family friends or whatnot who are like, my son is like president of NHS and this and that. And it's sometimes it's hard for someone who hasn't actually read admission files for multiple years or through multiple cycles to have that vantage point or perspective of like what normalcy looks like in a certain highly selective pool. Like I always say, I have a very warped sense of like a typical high school student's level of, for lack of a better word, achievement, because so many years of my life were spent reading students who
Right.
were top academicians of schools all across the world, many of whom were involved far beyond the standard student in a high school. So I think when you see headlines, like I recently saw, for example, a headline from, it was like this kid who had his own business that made multiple millions of dollars, and he would apply to all these top universities, and he was only accepted to Georgia Tech and like one or two other places. And I think a lot of people kind of in the admission world were like, well, we are not seeing the whole application. We're not seeing the whole story. You're seeing the soundbite. You're seeing the news headline, the news article. So I guess in terms of kind of like to wrap up our thoughts of this webinar is that I think something that you're probably gathering from a lot of our answers is that sometimes because of like media and public perception, there is a warped sense of how a lot of things work really behind the scenes at these colleges and universities. And so that's why I think it's really valuable to have insight from people like all of us at College Essay Guy. We have lots of different guides, resources, YouTube videos, do one-on-one support with students and families if they maybe are in an environment, high school or whatnot, where they don't have as much of that personalized support, because we know lots of school counselors are very stretched thin in terms of their caseload. So I guess my biggest piece of advice would just be to continue to attend these webinars, continue to take advantage of opportunities from people who have experience and expertise in this field, and don't just be leaning on media, sound bites, rumor mills, because that's the easiest way to, I'd say, lack clarity and direction with this process you're about to embark on.
Totally. And I want to
And
give
hello to Parker, our special guest. Yeah, that's
Hi,
a good
Parker.
way to end the session.
Well, I want to get into bonus time for just a second. somebody's asking about my kid plays sports, 2 sports year round, takes all of her time. This is out to all of y'all students or parents who have a student who just they do marching band or they do something like all the time. And what I want to say is, first of all, this is very practical, tactical. There's a little section called the additional information section where students can note if they have, for instance, they've spent a lot of time in a particular area, they can be like, hey, X thing took up this many hours of my time, which has made it really difficult for me to do other things. Not as sort of like an apology, but just as sharing the context. So rest assured that that option is available to you. But the second thing, and this is going to lead into like a practical exercise, one of the exercises that we love to do with students is called the roles and identities exercise. And this wouldn't be a webinar in 2025 if you didn't hear me mention it, because I'm talking about it a lot. I'll put it in the chat. But basically, this exercise is a cool way, and it's going to give you like a thing that you can actually do now if you want, to think about, well, what parts of myself do I want to manifest in my application? And if you're a ninth and 10th grader, how do I want to spend the next few years? So the way this works is pretty simple. You basically pick what are 3 to 5 different roles or identities that I would like to manifest somewhere in my application. You can do this whether you're in 9th, 10th, or 11th grade. So maybe, for instance, you're a bookworm, so you highlight bookworm. Maybe you're also a problem solver. Great, you highlight that. Maybe you're also an interest hopper. You've got lots of cool different things you've got. The question, if you're in 9th and 10th grade, is, well, how do you continue to like evolve these identities, these sides of yourself? If you're in 11th grade and you're getting ready to head into the summer, how could I take these to the next level this summer? So let's say you're a storyteller. What is you as a storyteller 2.0? What does that look like? And if you're somebody who does sports, you can actually apply this frame to your participation in sports. So let's say you do pick a sport, volleyball. How, as a volleyball, as a volleyball player, are you a problem solver? And you can pick any one of these from me. How are you a peacemaker? So my point here is that suddenly it takes that thing that's quote unquote just a sport and actually turns it into a place for you to manifest all these different sides of yourself. So on this sheet, you'll see a little work through that you can do. You can just make a copy of this. Just go to File, make a copy. And you'll see a whole bunch of different ways that you can use this in, again, 9th and 10th grade, because we work with students, 9th and 10th grade. And also, if you're getting ready to start the application process, a whole bunch of different ways that you can use this exercise to manifest it in your application. Like Tom said, we do work with students one-on-one, and we work with students whether you can pay for help or not. We've got our Match Letters program, which I will put in the chat. We're proud to say that we support students no matter what your income level is. So with that, I think we almost did it right around the hour mark. I want to say thanks. Thanks, Tom and Steph and John, for being here. And appreciate y'all. Appreciate all your lovely questions. And we hope to see you next week or soon enough on another one of these. Much love. Be well.